everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, contributor to Billboard and Access.com, welcoming you to another Things We Said Today, our weekly roundtable where we discuss the Beatles, past, present, and to come. Before we get into our discussion, I'm going to introduce you to my three cohorts in crime. Starting in the state of Maine, we have our musicologist who has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and many other fine publications out there, and also is the author of a book on the Beatles himself, Mr. Alan Kozin. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Steve. And as Maine goes, so goes the nation.
Oh.
We shall see.
Proposition number one, recreational use of marijuana becomes legal.
Uh-huh. We have that in California too, actually.
Okay, well, so as California goes, so goes Maine.
We'll see. Heading down the coast in Connecticut, we have the host of the Beatles show, Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Good evening, Ken.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Connecticut, the state that brought you Pez.
The nutmeg state.
Okay.
Comparing that to legalizing marijuana.
You don't have that on your ballot. We're by the way, we're talking about we're taping this a week before Election Day. That's why the political discussion. So no marijuana initiative on your ballot, Ken.
I'm not sure. I'll have to check.
Okay. And in the swing state of Pennsylvania, which is getting a lot of discussion, we have the executive editor of Beatles Fan, Mr. Al Sussman. Good evening, Al.
Hi, Steve. Hello there, everybody. And we are absolutely being inundated with TV and radio ads. I mean, I've never seen. I haven't been here for a political campaign, but because I was in New York and New Jersey, but I've never seen so many ads as I've been hearing and seeing the last month. And I mean, it's incessant.
Anyway, this week we got a couple of things to talk about. We are going to discuss a new Paul McCartney song that showed up on the internet over the weekend. It's called In the Blink of an Eye. It's for the soundtrack of the forthcoming movie Ethel and Ernest by the author of The Snowman, whose name I don't have in front of me.
Raymond Briggs.
Raymond Briggs, thank you, sir. And I wrote about him too. Anyway, the trailer I saw for that looks absolutely gorgeous. It really does. And it sounds like a beautiful story about the author's parents. But McCartney has a song in the soundtrack, and actually there's a second McCartney family song in the soundtrack.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah, Carl Davis, who did Liverpool Oratorio,
right? Just had a birthday,
right? Has done a new arrangement of Walking in the Park with Eloise on the album.
Oh, really?
Yes,
that's very nice.
Yeah. So that's interesting as well. But anyway, we've all heard the song, I think. Guys, what did you think of it? I'll start with Alan.
Oh, it's nice starting with me. I think I can muster up my enthusiasm enough to say that it was, so-so. But the really surprising thing actually was, we've been talking about his voice for some time, and live is one thing, but here is a studio recording where he really sounds kind of tenuous. Maybe we should just be getting used to that. Maybe that's just his voice for now these days. But I found it kind of surprising in a way, and that becomes a distraction because you're not really listening to the song anymore. You're saying, "My God, what's going on with him?" So,
I don't think the song is that great. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, that does kind of take away from that. And if you listen to, which I did yesterday, I kind of did a comparison with Hope for the Future. Hope for the Future doesn't sound like that at all. Hope for the Future sounds great. And and also the song he did for the Robert De Niro I Want to Come Home, the Robert De Niro film. That also, which actually in my mind is closer in style to In the Blink of an Eye than Hope for the Future is.
I would agree. I agree on that.
The one thing though between all three of them is they all have this very dramatic kind of build, which is kind of weird. I mean, even if you go back to Live and Let Die, he always likes these kind of dramatic soundtrack songs for some odd reason. But yeah, Come Home is very close to In the Blink of an Eye, but there's the voice in I Want to Come Home sounds really good compared to this, which sounds a little rougher. And I was actually watching an advanced copy of Havana Moon, the Rolling Stones movie about the Cuban performance, and I was noticing how good Jagger's voice sounds in that. And I don't know if it's the way they engineered it or whatever, or the way they mixed it, but his voice on that sounds great, and McCartney's voice on this does not sound as good. It's kind of it's kind of interesting that's happened. Al, let me go.
Why don't we do Ken first, because I think he has
Ken?
A contrary opinion to
right.
Alan's.
Go ahead, Ken.
Why do you automatically think that way, Al? First of all, as far as the song is concerned, I try not to rush to judgment because even though I've heard the song about 10 times now, I like it. When I heard I Want to Come Home, initially I thought, no, this is nice. It's a good song. It's a good, solid song. And now all these years later, I love I Want to Come Home. I love everything about that. So over time, your impression can change of a song or an album.
Right.
So I like this song because I love the arrangement. The string arrangement in the very beginning, done by Carl Davis, is really nice. And one thing that I found to be kind of different for Paul, it's not the first time he's done this, but the introduction, before you even get to Paul's vocals, it's about 50 seconds. And that's a long introduction,
I'm guessing this is going to be at the end of the movie. I mean, that's kind of the feeling you get because of that long instrumental. Do you guys agree with that?
I heard that it's supposed to be on the end credits.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, so that's why the vocal doesn't come in sooner, And it's funny, the preview that they had on iTunes didn't have the instrumental part. It had McCartney's voice, which was kind of interesting that they clipped that. I mean, basically that was the whole preview that they had was just McCartney's voice. But go ahead, Ken.
Well, I like the song. I'm not going to say it's a great song because it's still too new for me. But I like the whole production behind it. I think right now I feel the same way as I did when I Want to Come Home first came out. I don't hear the similarity that some people are pointing out in Hope for the Future. But the similarity in those three songs is that he does like to use orchestration, when it comes to soundtrack music, as witnessed, in those three songs. But as far as his voice is concerned, I am concerned about this, and there are times when it sounds strained. And I think we're really concerned about this because Paul has one of the greatest and flexible voices in all of music, and we're so used to how great his vocals are that when it's not as strong, and you can tell from some of his live performances, and now getting into the studio recordings, as we witnessed with Early Days, when the new album came out. And I remember him talking about Ethan Johns, the producer. There was a moment in there where he strained to hit a note, and he wanted to do it over. And Ethan said to him, no, leave it in. It shows your vulnerability, And now it sounds like he's going to keep it that way. I am concerned about the vocals. I don't know what's wrong with his voice. I do think that, you can take good care of your voice, in your 70s and 80s. But, I do have a comment to make about the Mick Jagger comparison. I don't know if you want me to bring it up now.
No, go ahead.
It's really unfair to make a comparison like that because you're dealing with different types of vocals altogether. Mick Jagger's vocals, what he has to to sing, it doesn't require, it's not really singing. It's his own style, much the same way that Bob Dylan's voice, he's so the way that he phrases things, the way that he projects himself. It's not like a singer's voice, and it's not as vocally demanding as the songs that Paul has done throughout his entire career. So you're dealing with a different type of vocals altogether. And what's required of Paul, especially in a 2.5 to 3 hour concert, is quite a lot for anybody at any age. And so if it wasn't for the fact that he is one of the greatest singers of all time and powerful singers, when you see it start to deteriorate this way, I don't blame anyone for being concerned about it.
I disagree with you, though, about saying Jagger is having it or is not, or his songs are somewhat less demanding, because if you think about Satisfaction, if you think about Angie, there's two songs right there that are completely different, in terms of tempo, in terms of the demands on his voice, and he gets through both of them fine.
It's still not a comparison. Paul's songs have such a range vocally, and you don't have that in Rolling Stones music.
No.
It's not that demanding. It's not that demanding to sing Angie, really, or any of the songs like Satisfaction. It's just his style. I'm not knocking Mick for saying that. That's just what those songs require. Okay. And he's perfect for doing those songs. But it's a different type of singing altogether. Okay.
All right. Al?
Well, my opinion is closer to Alan's as far as the song itself. It's pleasant. It's, it's there's a nice melody. The string arrangement by Carl Davis is very good. It's very nice. As I said, it's got a nice melody, although it's not an earworm. It's having heard it now several times, it hasn't wound its way into my subconscious the way other songs. I mean, I happened to mention last week, for some unknown reason, I spent about 2 days humming and singing London Town to myself. And I don't even remember where I heard it or whatever, but it just it had just, wormed its way into my subconscious, and there I was for 2 or 3 days humming and singing it to myself. This song does not have that kind of potential. No. Frankly, I find it in the vein of kind of those pleasant soundtrack songs that he's done, like Vanilla Sky, like I want to come home, which I just find it's nice, but it's nothing. It's certainly not in the pantheon of McCartney songs. Hope for the Future is much better. Plus, it's not a movie. It's not a movie soundtrack song anyway. It's a song from done for a video game. So it really it's apples and oranges.
It's kind of treated the same way, though.
Well, yeah,
I think so in its arrangement.
Right, in some of the arrangement, but it's a stronger song.
Yeah. Do you know? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. Go ahead, finish out.
Well, the other issue is definitely his voice, and I got to thinking about this, and probably recall that back in 1993 and 94. There were 2 very successful duets albums by Frank Sinatra that were released, commercially successful. He recorded the vocals. For people who don't remember, these are albums in which Frank did new vocals for a goodly number of his greatest hits, and had duets, although they were recorded totally separately, not nearly at the same time as Sinatra's vocals, by contemporary artists of his like Tony Bennett, but also a lot of newer artists like Bono, like Aretha Franklin, et cetera, et cetera. Now, he recorded all of the vocals in late June of '93, and when the albums came out, Sinatra's hardcore fans were absolutely appalled because his voice was a shard of what it was. And I, looked it up, and at the point that he recorded those two albums, Sinatra was not yet 78. He was about 77 and a half because his birthday was in December. So basically, he was about 3.5 years older at that point than Paul is now. And, obviously in Sinatra's case, he was paying the price for, an entire adult life of cigarettes and Jack Daniels. Paul, over the course of the last, he gave up smoking tobacco, at least, some years ago. But in the last, say, 15 years, he has toured almost continuously and playing large arenas, large stadiums, doing Helter Skelter and I'm Down and I Saw Her Standing There and other I'm Oh Darling and other.
He's never done Oh Darling.
He's never done Oh Darling in
never.
Ever. Really?
No.
Okay. All right. I'll take that back then. But he's done, a number of his up-tempo rockers, and some of them on a pretty regular basis. So he's certainly done damage to his throat. We've talked about this before, that I feel that he should basically stop doing stadiums and large arenas. And also stop the continuous touring and compress the amount of time that the shows take. But it's possible that the fact that at 74 his voice is in that kind of condition is probably not surprising.
Although I wouldn't put him in the same comparison with Frank Sinatra either.
Well, similar. There's similar wear and tear, let's put it this way, although different kinds of wear and tear.
Well, Paul's had one of these vocals that is, like I said, very flexible. He does all kinds of vocals throughout his career. He can go from a low voice like in Lady Madonna to a screaming vocal like Monkberry Moon Delight or Helter Skelter to, falsetto vocals like that he's done sometimes, like in Girlfriend. It's all over the place what he's done vocally. Whereas, Frank is a crooner and he's had tremendous range in his vocal and tremendous emotion, which he's very well known for. His styling and the way that he sings. He was the best at his craft to so many people. But I don't put him in the same category as Paul. Whereas Paul's kind of vocally all over the place.
Right. I'm not making a musical comparison. I'm talking about basically the wear and tear on the instrument.
Right.
And again, in Sinatra's case, it was cigarettes and Jack Daniels. In Paul's case, it may have been, I'm sure the years of smoking that he did do didn't do a whole lot of good to his throat. But I have a feeling that all of the touring he's done the last 15 years hasn't really done much good to it.
No, you have an excellent point there.
Yep.
Well, in any event, we'll see. We'll see what happens when this thing finally comes out. What was really funny was the song popped up on UK iTunes, and I guess in Australia, according to what I was told, but still hadn't popped up in the US. I haven't checked the last, since Friday when the song came out, but it was not on US iTunes as of Friday, so they didn't roll it out all over the world at the same time, which is kind of a little strange.
But what's more surprising, though, is that it just sort of came out.
Yeah.
With we never heard anything about this song.
Well, there were. I heard. I got rumors a couple of days before that I couldn't hear, or I couldn't find anything, and I tried to get some confirmation, and of course they wouldn't say anything. So, but yeah, it did finally come out. But yeah, it just kind of popped out there. So anyway, but I believe the CD's been available for pre-order from before that, but the previews hadn't come out until Friday. So in any event, all right. Also for just briefly mention that I was listening to an advanced copy of Plastic Ono Band, Yoko's Plastic Ono Band album, which is going to be released in November. And it's the same as the Ryko disc version for those of you that have that. So, but that's for another time. That's a discussion for another time. We're not going to talk about Yoko today. But we are going to talk, given that we are just over a week on the day we're taping this from the election, we're going to talk about the Beatles and politics.
And also social causes, Steve.
Thank you, Ken. But let's start with the Beatles themselves. They really kind of, laid the groundwork and were kind of pioneers at that time, in the 60s, because that was not something you did outside of Bob Dylan. Nobody, and Joan Baez maybe, there wasn't a lot of pop music that was, going social like that. And then, here we get these four guys that, that initially looked like they were, four, smiley, nice looking guys, and they had deeper feelings. They had feelings about the world. They had political leanings, which kind of surprised people. I think Taxman was one of the first instances where we had that kind of idea. I mean, there were other things too. I mean, they mentioned drugs in the songs, like Dr. Robert. There's Blackbird, which Paul now says is race, and I could swear I never heard that. I never recall that from back then. And of course, there's Revolution, which was John's big song about political change. Let me go around the table. I'm gonna Ken. Let's start with you on this. What do you think about the Beatles? Let's keep it to the Beatles rather than solo. We'll talk solo at the end of this. But what do you think about the Beatles and politics and their political voice?
Well, I didn't think you heard all that much about it in the 60s. I mean, the main thing was, and it's understandable, when you first break out as an artist, you don't want to be controversial in any way. And right. Brian Epstein was very aware of that. He didn't want the Beatles to talk about politics. And it was only a few years later, 66, when they started to say that they were against Vietnam. So just the mere fact that they even said that was shocking for its time. But I don't really think it was something that was highlighted all that much. You didn't really think of the Beatles that way. No. Even still. I mean, maybe when Revolution came out, I think that was a standout song where, it expressed political view there. Even mentioning Chairman Mao in a song, I think, was a bit shocking.
Right.
But you were saying before about Bob Dylan and those people. You have to also mention Pete Seeger and Peter, Paul, and Mary and all the folk artists who were there for civil rights and against Vietnam, too. But I think more of, in particular, John and Yoko, when they went out and did the bed-ins and all their campaigns for peace, more so than I would think of the Beatles as a group. That's me personally.
Okay. Al?
Well, actually, I'm kind of on the same wavelength with Ken here. And I have a quote here from 1963. In fact, it's on the it's from either 63 or 64. But it's from John Lennon, and it's in the John Lennon section on the Beatles story. The documentary album that Capitol put out in late 64. And he says, politics, they have no message for me, nor for any in our group. The bomb, nuclear disarmament, well, like everyone else, I don't want to end up a festering heap, but I don't stay up nights worrying. I'm preoccupied with life, not death. And also in the second of Ed Rudy's Beatles interview albums, the one that was mostly recorded during the summer of '64, the summer tour, the U.S. tour in the summer of '64. There's a clip of John at a press conference, and of course they were being asked at almost every press conference that summer about who they preferred in the presidential election, Lyndon Johnson or Barry Goldwater. And John kind of jokingly says in this one clip, yeah, Eisenhower. I think he should get in again. Obviously knowing that he wasn't constitutionally able to be elected for a third term, and then said, no, we don't really have any preference. So they really were not, certainly in those very early years, they were not overtly political at all. In fact, they even waited until they were in Toronto, and I think this was in '65, before they made their first comment against the war in Vietnam. And that came out more strongly for it in '66, but that was of course overshadowed by the whole Christ thing. So really, they were not overtly political in any way at that point. And when you think about it, it really was only and this is much later in their time as a group. It's really only John Lennon that was really at all kind of political, and obviously Revolution, as Ken mentioned, is the most obvious example of that, because that was a perfect song for its time, because it reflected just how conflicted a lot of us felt back there in the summer of '68. The Hey Jude and Revolution came out the week after the Democratic Convention in Chicago. And a lot of us were, very conflicted about, we certainly wanted change. We wanted the war ended, but we were not really sold on violence. As a matter of fact, Tom Hayden, who just passed away this past week, and was one of the Chicago Seven, even though he was put on trial for inciting a riot at the Democratic Convention, a riot that actually was precipitated by the police. He actually was a pacifist. So he had the same kind of political conflicts that I think a lot of us felt at that time, and certainly Revolution reflected that. But other than Revolution, there's really not very much in the Beatles canon, the Beatles group canon, that's really at all really political. So it really is the years beyond the Beatles, and really just and John Lennon, and to a much lesser extent Paul McCartney, who was involved with political activity.
There were a couple. The Playboy interview in February '65 tried to or touched on a couple of political topics. I think it mentioned religion. It mentioned homosexuality, but Playboy interviews went all over the place anyway. But there wasn't a whole lot of politics early on. That's sure. And it wasn't until 65, 66 when they really started to, especially with the Revolver albums.
Yeah, I have a slightly different point of view, although my point of view is more in retrospect than what we experienced at the time. At the time, we didn't really hear all that much about their politics until maybe 66, when it began coming out a little. But that said, we now know, for instance, about the contracts that said that they wouldn't play for a segregated audience in Jacksonville, for instance. The 8 days a week film makes quite a big deal of that, and it was a big deal. It was taking a social stance on an issue that they could have stayed out of, if they wanted to. I mean, other groups were. Nobody else was making a real big deal about it. In '66, even before they began speaking up at press conferences, which apparently they told Epstein that they were going to do if asked, and naturally they were asked. When they were asked about the Butcher cover, what's that about? I think it was John who said that it's as relevant as Vietnam, was the quote. And, you can see he's, okay, we're talking about an album cover with dead babies, and, he's saying something. And then in '66 they began actually talking a bit about the war, about civil rights. People asked them about civil rights, and they talked about that. And then, from then on, I mean, their Taxman, as Steve mentioned, I mean, that was definitely a political comment about taxation in England and the, high rates that they were asked to pay, and mentions, prime ministers and British politicians might not have meant as much to us in America, but I think we knew what they were talking about. And to the degree that we didn't know what they were talking about, it was pretty easy at the time to find explanations, about the 95% tax rate in Britain, for example. And then, you get up to, as we've all said, revolution. But revolution was a very contentious thing. And the fact that he did 3 of them is, he's painting a big picture there, where Revolution 9 is actually sort of showing the revolution, and it's terrifying. And, and what he's saying is, when you talk about destruction, you can count me out. And then there's supposedly, his ambivalence about out, in. If you carry pictures, the reference to Chairman Mao is actually completely negative. If you carry pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. For people on the left really took this as an affront, and he was interviewed by that magazine Red Mole at the time, and where they basically went and said, what do you think, what are you saying here? You're against the revolution, you're against us, you're against everything that we would have thought you stood for. And he basically, held his ground and said, I agree things have to change, but if you're talking about revolution, you're not thinking it through. And, but from there on, it was, you begin to see lots of little things, like in the continuing story of Bungalow Bill, the tiger hunter or the elephant hunter. There's that impression of, is sort of a negative thing, of just shooting these animals. And, he sort of in a way got to that before Paul. And the peace campaign, really was kind of, I think, of an outgrowth of all these discussions around revolution and what's going on and everything. And although the peace campaign, as we think of it as a solo effort, it began while the Beatles were together, and the rest of them answered for it too. When they were asked, it was sort of clear that they were behind it as well. So, yeah, I think there was more political stuff going on than we knew about at the time, or, they were, I think, subversively getting messages through until they were so big that no one was going to be able to tell them not to do it, as Epstein did in the beginning.
There's also, of course, the Jesus quote from Lenin that caused all sorts of craziness in America, especially.
Well, that's true.
And God, I mean, can you imagine, given what we've been going through the last couple of months, can you imagine what that would have been like now? I mean, had to have a star of that magnitude at a time when entertainers didn't really talk about things like religion, for somebody to come out and to say what John was. And I remember the reaction. The reaction was nuts. It was absolutely, I mean, it makes some of the stuff that's going on today I mean, it probably ranks up there with the craziness of the stuff that's going on today. And I'm not gonna make any political comments either way. But I mean, there were just it was the reaction was just crazy because the establishment was what ran things, and for somebody to talk against the establishment like that in those days was just nuts. And I mean, I know I heard it as a kid from you heard adults saying, well, what is this guy Lennon doing? What is he doing? He's blah blah blah. And I don't remember hearing anything in church about it, but I'm sure there were ministers and pastors that said something about it in church too. I mean,
well, actually, most of them agreed with him because because that was at a point in time. In fact, it was about a month after the interview that he did with Maureen Cleave when it first appeared in the London Evening Standard, was when Time magazine had a cover story saying, "Is God dead?"
Right,
and which is right in line with what John was saying, and so a lot of clergy, in fact, said, "Yeah, the pop stars are more popular than Jesus now." The real bad reaction was because of the fact that the out of context quote had been fed to Bible Belt radio stations, and which is the height of hypocrisy, because these were this is in parts of the country where we don't want we won't let black people have equal rights, but don't say anything against Jesus, that sort of thing.
Right, and there were two different streams of reaction to that for sure. There were the religious people who thought what he said was horrible, and didn't. Well, no, the religious people. No, but there were people that they didn't. Most of the religious people at the time were saying, "Yeah, he's right." I disagree with you because I was in parochial school at the time. The nuns didn't take very kindly to that. I'll tell you that now. And anybody, there was a stream of thought. It was very, and I'm not talking about the people, the Southerners who, demanded that, tried to try and burn Beatle records. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about.
The only thing about that is that this happened in August. You would not have been in school. So there couldn't have been too much reaction from.
Well, maybe I'm talking about maybe in my personal life, but I seem to remember a lot of negative reaction. I seem to remember a lot of negative reaction, and it wasn't. There were, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who would feel that way. That not everybody took it as open-mindedly as you're suggesting. I mean, it would have been very nice, but I don't think everybody was that open-minded. So.
By the way, what's completely overlooked in all of that is that in the very same interview he said something like, Jews invented the entertainment industry. It's part of their religion, and there's the only reaction I've ever seen to it is at one press conference. Someone asked, quoted it to him and said, "Would you like to comment on that?" And he just said no.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
But the
anyway.
Beatles being bigger than Jesus, I don't look at as being an anti-establishment stance. I think he was just reflecting what was going on and just saying it. And as they said in the famous press conference, Paul said that they were deploring that fact. So
that was certainly
like,
that was their spin, but there was a lot of negative reaction. I remember that very well. Maybe because I was, maybe I'm showing my age, but Al, I mean, you got to remember a little of that.
I remember it very clearly. That's why I'm telling you that, aside from, there was obviously some, media. And of course, again, this is the thing that the media in 1966 was, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly extremely middle-aged, and jumped on anything negative. So obviously some of the media, there wasn't that much electronic media that would have been covering it, but certainly the press jumped on it.
And that's why Lennon was forced to apologize, which he didn't. He probably who was it that said or Paul said it in 8 Days a Week that he felt horrible about having to do that, but that's what he was forced to do,
right?
And so there was the establishment came down heavily on them, and I'm not just talking about the burning of the all the way around. I mean, that's what happened, but. In any event, all right. So we've established the fact that the Beatles did get political in their later years. Once they got into the solo stuff, the politics did continue. Although one of the Beatles obviously was a lot more political than the rest of them, and that was Lennon. And it had to Lennon and Yoko. I mean, the bed-ins, the public statements, everything, the protests. They were very political, and of course Yoko still does that today. But I think to a certain extent they all were. I mean, they all have gone. They've all done political stuff.
Not much.
Not much. But there are.
In George's case, really, other than the concert for Bangladesh, which was more of a humanitarian gesture, it was not a political statement. Mm-hmm. He really stayed away from politics pretty much exclusively. And Ringo, aside from a few kind of, not all that well-known causes that he's been for, ecological causes, the peace and love, philosophy is fine, but he's never really been overtly political. It really was just John, and to a much lesser extent, Paul.
Mm-hmm. Ringo did come out against, in favor of Brexit, the recent.
Oh yes,
right. That he sounded like he really didn't understand what was going on there.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he did come out and express a definite opinion about it, and even gave a reason, although as you say, it wasn't a very well reasoned reason. And in George's case, you're right, he was more interested in humanitarian causes. In addition, there was the Romanian angel appeal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he may have had political feelings about the dispute between Pakistan and Bangladesh and everything, but he didn't really get into that, and and also the fact that Ravi Shankar was also sort of behind that, and Ravi Shankar is an Indian, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, or you've got that sort of Hindu versus Muslim thing going, and yet they kept out of that completely. They didn't deal with it as some of the religious issues that were definitely flashpoints in those countries. They looked at it. They didn't get into that at all, and dealt with it simply as an issue of people were suffering because of flooding and famine and all kinds of other issues that were going on, and purely as a humanitarian thing.
Right.
The Romanian angel appeal too. That also. I mean, the whole problem had to do with political issues. But they left the political issues aside and just dealt with the orphans and that kind of thing. So, yeah, George, I'm not sure, apart from, I guess, Taxman, I'm not sure what to say about whether he's been overt in any of his political feelings.
Well, George also did that one concert in England where he was supporting the Maharishi.
Right.
When he was running for, what political office was it? Remember?
I'm not sure if it was the Maharishi himself or a party that the Maharishi was supporting. It was.
You're talking. Is that the party? The one that Mike Love was part of? I can't remember it now, because Mike Love was a part of a party that was associated, a political party that was associated with the Maharishi, and I can't remember.
Yeah, I
the
want to
name
say
of it.
something like the Whole Life Party or something like that. I can't
Right.
remember what it actually was, but yeah, we're talking about the concert in 1991, 92. That one, or
Yeah,
something
that one. Yep.
Yeah, so okay, that was supporting a party cause, but I don't think anybody really knew what the party really was doing.
Yeah.
So it was like the very silly party.
But he does have. Harrison's name is on a UNICEF fund today, which is again more humanitarian than anything else. But that is out there, so to that extent, his name continues. To be associated with humanitarian causes. Paul, of course, give Ireland back to the Irish.
Right.
He's also, he's made comments about political candidates. He was pictured with Hillary Clinton a couple of months ago.
Right.
He did
a fundraiser for.
Right, he did a fundraiser with John Bon Jovi and a couple of few other people.
I should mention that Harrison went to the Gerald Ford White House.
That's right.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Right, that's right too. There's that picture of George and Ravi Shankar and
Billy Preston.
Billy Preston, right? There were several other people there for that. And John went to the Jimmy Carter's inauguration. John and Yoko did. So.
And Paul also wrote Big Boys Bickering, which really, is a commentary about politicians, not getting along, just, fighting with each other, not getting anything done.
I wonder if he'll write something this year. I wonder if he'll write something this year.
It's a little late. You ought to do it quick.
I was going to say, probably would have already happened.
Yeah.
And don't forget that Paul also helped organize the concert for New York.
Sure.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That was just so important.
Thank you.
And
and
performed
during
there and did the song Freedom, wrote it for that occasion.
Right. And during the dreaded Heather Mills period, he did through her do a fair amount of work regarding the prevention of landmines.
Right.
And also the to try to stop the clubbing of seals.
That's right.
In the around the North Pole and all.
And I suppose the whole vegetarian thing, the Meat Free Monday thing, kind of borders on political too. Although it's
Well, he does periodically show up at environmental conferences and meetings to talk about the environmental consequences of raising meat for eating use, and so that actually it does edge into the political too.
Right, and you have to give Linda McCartney a lot of credit.
Oh yeah,
too. For championing animal rights and putting out the vegetarian frozen food line.
Sure, absolutely.
He hasn't been as much into the animal rights thing now as he used to be. He's kind of backed away from that a little bit. I know that there was a time when I saw him at Hollywood Bowl that night. They were giving out the PETA DVDs, the one that he narrates about. You guys know the one I'm talking about, I'm sure. About the meat factories. So I mean, he's kind of, seems like he's kind of backed away from that. Of course, he did that PETA benefit several years ago.
Right.
But there's another thing that he's done a lot of.
And writing songs about animal cruelty.
Yes.
Looking for changes would be one of those songs. Long Leather Coat is another one.
Yeah.
Same time period, really. That Flowers in the Dirt period.
Yep.
Yeah. We kind of passed over Ringo a little bit. And we all, but
you were saying that basically he really, other than coming out for a few ecological things, and as Alan mentioned, the one comment about Brexit, which probably was ill-advised. Other than the whole peace and love philosophy, he really has not been overtly political at all.
he did play at Bangladesh, of course.
Well, again, that's not a political statement. That's simply playing at a concert that was, a humanitarian gesture.
Mm-hmm.
He's really never made any really overtly political statements.
Well, if you equate the Jesus statement that Lennon made, I mean, he did talk about God in a movie a couple of years ago, which surprised the hell out of everybody because nobody thought Ringo cared about God at all, and apparently, he does. So,
well, that's not politics.
Well, depending on the group you travel in, it could be, but yeah, no, I understand. I get what you're saying there, but I'm just saying he did go into the opinion area, which he usually doesn't do. You're right. He's not really kind of an opinionated guy. He basically stays out of everything controversial.
Yeah.
He's not, unless you call peace and love controversial.
Oh yeah. No, not at all. Who can quibble with that?
He's not a spokesperson for anything political.
No.
But it is important to bring up the peace and love thing because for the past 7 years, he's held an event on his birthday worldwide where he wants to say the words where we can all say it at the same time. So he's bringing attention to that. He says those 2 words, peace and love, 3 words really, in every single interview.
Sure.
He always ends everything with peace and love. And he ends his concert saying peace and love. So he's carrying that message, and it's evidently extremely important to him.
And he's gone up to, I don't think he does it every year, but he has gone up to Iceland when Yoko has lit the Imagine Peace Tower. Right, yeah, I just thought of it. The Imagine Peace Tower. So he has supported her in that. And actually, I'm surprised that the 2 of them don't get more, aren't linked more with their peace efforts, although Yoko's are more distinct than his is, but I think there's a little bit of connection there between the 2 of them as far as that goes, that they are both pushing for peace in different ways. But I think that and I wouldn't be at all surprised if Ringo's motivation had to do just a little bit with John. And I don't think that gets, I mean, he doesn't say it, but of course, I mean, that's really the conclusion you can draw, that's where it's connected.
Well, he does use Give Peace a Chance, in his concerts.
Right. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, that is true. That is true. So,
but really, there's a lot to talk about where John is concerned.
Of course.
Because Give Peace a Chance was an anthem.
Sure.
Right.
And it was sung in front of the Washington Monument. In front of how many people?
Yeah, well,
like half a million people.
We did almost a whole show with Kit O'Toole regarding her piece on the advertising campaign that really was the peace campaign with the bed-ins, with Give Peace a Chance, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, that whole thing about the immigration thing, I mean, that was very overtly political.
Oh,
I mean,
of course. Oh, sure.
And that was, I mean, you couldn't get more political than that. In the middle of the Nixon administration, I mean, that was frightening. I mean, that not just what happened to John, but just the whole atmosphere at the time.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I mean, people have talked about instances in more recent years about that kind of thing with, government spying, but it was really absolutely going on then. There's the paranoia, I keep thinking of the Stephen Stills line, "Paranoia strikes deep." That was very true back then in the late 60s. No question about it.
Well, the Nixon administration's persecution of John and their efforts to throw him out of the country really can be, included in the whole what John Mitchell called the White House horrors. Mm-hmm. That included Watergate and the cover-up and everything else, and it's pretty scary.
Yeah,
when you look back on it.
All the President's Men was on Turner Classic Movies
Right.
recently, and I know there were lots of comments on Facebook. I know I mentioned it because I really love the movie, but there were a lot of comments from people who had never seen it and never realized what happened at the time.
Yeah.
And that movie really gives only a partial view of what was going on. I mean, it was some scary times, and John and Yoko were in the middle of that, and that they came out in one piece, is due in large part to Leon Wiles, who his attorney, but also their own personal strength in their relationship, and people are still to this day, there's a lot of criticism of Yoko, but damn it, I mean, if it wasn't for her, and him also, but I mean, if it wasn't for their relationship and the strength of their relationship, they wouldn't have gotten out of that alive. I mean, it was amazing. So.
Well, you got to remember that right in the middle of all of that was, their 18-month separation.
Right.
So they weren't that much of a united front. A lot of that.
During the wait a minute now, during the thing with the immigration, when they were fighting for the green card, they were together.
Well, when he got the green card,
right?
But much of in '74 and the very early part of '75, they were and part of '73 they were separated.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
So John was going through a lot of that, on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing to remember, really, and I'm only saying this because I think we may have some younger people listening to the show, maybe some millennials, who may not understand why John went through all this persecution, is because of the fact that he was looked upon as being a threat to the Nixon administration because he'd be an influence on the youth. And that was right around the time when the voting age was lower.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly.
So that's the main reason why that all happened. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at a quote from John, and I suspect this is probably early on in the Beatles days, where he said, "We're not disinterested in politics. It's just that politicians are disinteresting," and it's very ironic how that changed. Very ironic how that changed for all of them, not just for him. So, in any event, go ahead, Ken.
I just think it's very important to point out one thing because of one particular issue of many that's brought up in this presidential election is women's rights. John changed so much from the person who at one time said women should be obscene and not heard to being very heavily influenced by Yoko and being very much a feminist, hence recording the song "Woman is the Nigger of the World." So, he'd certainly be right there today championing women's causes.
Anyway,
women's rights.
I've been keeping an eye on the clock, and we are just about out of time, gentlemen. I'm going to start with saying if you'd like to get a hold of the show, you can write to us at thingswesaidradioshow@gmail.com. You can tweet us at @thingswesaidfab. We would dearly, dearly appreciate that if you especially love this show, and we know you all do, that you would review us on iTunes. We would very much appreciate that, please. And I'm gonna. You can get a hold of me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I have my own personal Facebook page where I will tell you that up until at least the election, I will be talking about Beatles and other things. And but I do have a non-political Facebook music group called Beatles News and Commentary, where you are welcome to join and talk about the Beatles and and whatever Beatle thing catches you. So I'm going to go around the table, starting with Alan. Alan, where can people get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way to do that is through Facebook, either on my regular page, Alan Kozin, or on Alan Kozin Remixed.
Okay, and
remember to vote.
There we go. Yes, very much so. Remember to vote. Al, your turn.
Okay, you can get in touch with me on Facebook at Al Sussman, or on Twitter at ASUSS49. And I don't do politics, deliberately.
Okay.
It just takes up too much time, and even though I'm a political junkie myself, it just I just don't feel the need to do political arguments on social media. But yes, definitely go vote.
Okay. Mr. Michaels, would you like to put in your final word?
Yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, my email address is everylittlething@att.net. You can also join me on my Facebook page under Ken Michaels. There's a photo of me, my wife, my son with Todd Rundgren. That's how you know it's me. And also on my website, kenmichaelsradio.com. As I usually say in every show, there's a Beatles trivia and games page every single week. There's Beatles trivia. You can win one of 9 prizes. I do have new CD from the Weaklings to give away, with all 4 guys signing the CD. And I also have, I don't know if any of you guys have read this yet, but Brian Wilson has a new book out. It's called I Am Brian Wilson. It's his memoirs. And I have one copy of the book to give away.
And you're not giving it to me?
I'm surprised you don't have it.
No, I don't have it yet.
You're not giving away Mike Love's book?
No. I'm working on it.
I wonder why.
Not after what he said about Paul McCartney at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, no.
Ooh.
All right.
See what you get, Mike Love? Darn.
But also, like everyone else has said, please go out and vote. If you don't vote, then you have no right to complain. All right? So go out and do it.
And I will reiterate that, go out and vote. One more thing, I mentioned Alan's book, but Alan, I didn't mention Al's book, and I didn't mention mine. I have an ebook called Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones. It's very cheap. It's available at Amazon. And Al, tell them about your book.
It's Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped a Generation, about a very change-filled 101 days between November 22nd, 1963 and March 1st, 1964.
Okay, and Alan, you actually have 2 books. Go ahead and...
I do. The one is called The Beatles, From the Cavern to the Rooftop. It's a regular book. You can get it at Amazon or anywhere, published by Phaidon. And the other is an ebook called Got That Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything, published by New York Times Books.
There we go. Okay. Well, it looks like we are down to the end of another show. Thank you for listening and your continued loyalty to things we said today. And we hope you will be with us again next week, when we will all be back here yelling and screaming and talking about the Beatles. I don't know what we're going to talk about. Do we know? We don't know what we're going to talk about next week yet, do we? So you will learn with us what we are going to talk about next week when you come. So we'll look forward to seeing you again then. This is Steve Marinucci for Ken Michaels, Alan Kozin, and Al Sussman saying thank you for listening, and go vote, and we will see you next time.